All right. Thank you, Jay-Z. And big thank you to Lenny for putting on this amazing conference, inviting all his friends. Welcome, Lenny's friends. All right. So today, we're going to talk about rituals for great decision making. And before we get into decision making, we're going to talk about the first word, rituals. So rituals is a topic that I'm obsessed with. I think people have some normal hobbies. I have this weird one. I like to collect up people's rituals. I'm actually turning it into a book. It's called Rituals of Great Teams. And my whole inspiration for it started with a conversation with this guy, Bing Gordon. And Bing, if you don't know him, he was the chief creative officer at Electronic Arts. He's now a famous investor, places like Zynga, Amazon, many other great companies. He and I sat on a board together, and he kept harassing the CEO with this question. He said, "What are your golden rituals?" And none of us really knew what he was talking about. So he said, "Bing, what's a golden ritual?" And he said, well, great companies have a small list of golden rituals, and they have 3 tests. And he quickly rattled them off. Number 1, they're named. Number 2, every employee knows them by their first Friday. And number 3, they're templated. And he quickly gave his list. Amazon has 6-pagers, Google does OKRs, Salesforce does V2MOM. And if you want to be a great company, you have to have a great set of golden rituals. So I got pretty obsessed with this idea, started collecting up all of these rituals I could find and putting them into a book. By the way, if you'd like, I'm writing the book in the open, so you can come join what I call the Brain Trust, ritualsofgreatteams.com, and I publish about a chapter at a time, and I'd love your feedback and your contributions. Along the way, I got to meet lots of interesting people. One of the most interesting conversations was with Dharmesh Shah. So Dharmesh, for those of you that don't know him, he's the founder of HubSpot, and he had this really interesting perspective on rituals. So first off, he shared a ritual called Flashtags. I'll talk more about that a little bit later in the talk. But he also made an observation that everyone here, we all build products. And for the most part, we focus on one customer. We build products for our end customer. But we actually build 2 products. There's another product we build for our employees. And if you ask people to describe that, they'll often use a term like culture. But then if you ask them to start describing culture, they'll describe it using the word rituals. So oftentimes we talk about these rituals and they feel like, oh, that's just the way we work, that's our operating system. But actually when we're designing rituals, we're building a 2-way mirror of our culture. So we're going to spend a lot of time on decision making, but actually my broader ask of all of you is to think about what you spend your days on. You're probably spending most of your time on the right-hand side of this picture designing products for your customers. Think about how you can spend just as much time designing the product for your teams, the rituals that really run how your culture operates. All right, that's rituals. Today we're going to talk about a specific type of rituals about great decision making, and we're going to focus on 4 different topics. How can we ask the right question? How we can follow the right decision process in the right forum with the right stakeholders. All right, before I get started on this, I have 2 big caveats. So first one is, I'm going to give you a lot of examples. I stuffed as many examples into 25 minutes as I possibly could. The examples are meant to be inspirational. If some of them resonate with you, you should use them exactly as is. But really, my main point of this talk isn't to take someone else's rituals. It's to be inspired to design your own. And the second big caveat is, I'm going to show you a lot of examples from Coda, the company, from Coda customers, and so on. While I think Coda is a great product for running your rituals in, you can feel free to implement these in whatever your toolkit is. The main point is take control of how your teams run their rituals. All right. Ready for topic number 1? Let's talk about asking the right question. And I want to start this with a story from my time at YouTube. And we're going to talk about a topic called IGEN Questions. So to describe IGEN Questions, maybe I'll go back in time to 2008 and tell you about a situation we had. We called this topic the modern family question. So as Jay-Z was saying, I joined YouTube fairly early on, 2008. YouTube was facing a lot of hard times. We were losing a lot of money. We had grainy videos. We had a big lawsuit. But actually, if you sat in one of our staff meetings any day in 2008, you'd probably hear us talking about this thing called the modern family question. So what was the question? So we would look at, every day, we'd look at our search queries. YouTube was then and still is now the second biggest search engine on the planet. we get our list of search queries, and one of the top 5 queries every week was for Modern Family. That wasn't that big a surprise. Modern Family was the #1 show on TV at the time. There was one big problem. We didn't have Modern Family on YouTube. And there was a big debate about what we should do about it. Now, in the meantime, ABC.com had decided to upload every episode of Modern Family online available for free. And I know that's not such a big deal now, but in 2008, that wasn't a very common thing to do, especially not with the #1 show on TV. And so the team divided up, and basically half the team said, we should link out to ABC.com. We're owned by Google, do the right thing by the user. And the other half of the team felt that was suicide. If we did that, then nobody would ever upload great content to YouTube, and we absolutely should not do that. Every meeting we'd have the discussion, wouldn't get a resolution, we'd roll it over, and the Modern Family question persisted. At some point, we decided to hold an offsite to talk about what we're going to do about this, and I got asked to go frame the discussion, pull some data, try to come up with a framework, and it was really hard because everybody was already stuck in their viewpoint. They already knew what they felt. And the night before, I ended up reading a paper from another team, from the Google Shopping team, and they had gone and done all this research on why people were choosing Amazon over Google Shopping. And what they learned was all the users kept telling them, we know that Google Shopping has indexed all of Amazon and the rest of the internet, but I prefer Amazon because it feels like a consistent experience. It doesn't have everything, but I know how the reviews work, I know how the pricing work, I know how the shipping works, so I'm going to pick consistency over comprehensiveness. So I decided that rather than talking about Modern Family and should we link out sites, we decided to start this discussion with a different topic and said, in 10 years, will the online video market value consistency or comprehensiveness? This discussion we got through pretty fast, took about an hour, and we came to the conclusion that it would be about consistency. And I think, by the way, looking backwards now, this discussion was 16 years ago. I think we were right. The online video market exploded, and there is no one site that is comprehensive. Consistency definitely won. But it turned out that by answering this question, we not only answered the question about whether or not we should link out sites, we answered many other questions as well. We decided not to take third-party embed players on YouTube. Probably one of the most famous things was we ended up taking back control of our iOS app from the Apple team, which is probably a story for a different talk. But this whole concept of choosing the right question got a name. It's called IGEN Questions. So first off, the word eigenquestion is completely made up, but it's based off of a math word called eigenvectors. So for those of you that remember from linear algebra class, an eigenvector is the most discriminating vector in a multidimensional space. But if you don't remember that, don't want to remember that, doesn't really matter. You can just use the word. So here's what an eigenquestion is. It's the question that, if answered first, would answer most of the other questions. It's a pretty simple idea. I'm sure you can picture a time you sat down to have a discussion. You've got 10 questions in your list, and how are they ordered? They might be ordered by, whenever it got brought up. It might be by severity. The reason we were talking about the Modern Family question was we were trying to deal with ABC.com, and so that's what was at the top of the list. But actually, the right question to answer might be number 6 in that list. And if you answer that question, you'll end up answering all the others as well. Another way to think about this is we spend a lot of time trying to get to the right answer, and I'd encourage you to think about how do you get to the right question. If you want to know more about this, I wrote a piece about it on IGEN Questions. You can go hear more about those stories. But I'll move on to topic number 2. So you got the right question, you're ready to make a decision. How do you form the right decision process? I had this really fun conversation with Colin Brer. Colin was former chief of staff to Jeff Bezos at Amazon. He wrote a book called Working Backwards. And we ended up talking about a famous moment in 2004. Turned out 2 important things happened in 2004. The first one was there was this really famous memo that got sent out from Jeff Bezos saying, no more PowerPoints. Colin told us the story. Apparently, he was the one that drafted this memo. He handed it to Jeff, sent it out. They didn't think it was going to be that big a deal. But of course, it's a deal that not only changed all of Amazon, it probably changed every other company. My guess is everyone here either runs the Amazon write-up culture or anti-runs the Amazon write-up culture, one or the other. So I said 2 things happened in 2004. The other thing that happened in 2004 was a new product came out called Writely. Writely was a predecessor to Google Docs. And all of a sudden, we had Jeff telling us to do write-ups, and we had a new product that allowed us to co-write with each other. Totally magical experience. And it had one really interesting feature that everybody took for granted. It had a right-hand rail where we could all add comments. And we could sort of talk with each other that way. So we had an event. We were talking about this process with Colin and a few other people. And one of the folks asked this question. It says, it feels like the most important decisions in our company are jammed into the 100-pixel panel hanging off the side of a Google Doc. Is that really the best we can do? And this led to a really interesting conversation about what's wrong with that. And so we came up with a few different things. First one we said is, you send out your doc, and what does everybody do? You watch the avatars at the top. And the CEO comes in, wanders around your document, and then leaves. What the hell does that mean? So we have one problem first. Comments have you need to actually leave them. Another problem, you get to the review, and you're ready to go through the discussion. So what do? You go through them in order of the comments. And the first one says, hey, you made a spelling mistake here. Second one says, I don't like the grammar here. Third one says, do you really think this is a good idea? I think maybe we should cancel this project. And you kind of work through these things in clearly the wrong order to have your discussion. But the most important thing is while you're talking and going through all these comments, there's a Slack thread in the background where people are asking, are they really serious about this? We're really going to do this? Or maybe it's a great idea. But all of that's happening outside of this discussion. So is there a better way? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a ritual we do at Coda. And if you were to ask a set of Coda employees about our golden ritual, they would almost certainly tell you about this. We sometimes refer to it as two-way write-ups. It sometimes gets shortened to Dory Pulse. It's a pretty simple idea. You send out a write-up. The driver of the meeting will add a done reading button, different points in the document, just to make sure you're there and keeping up. Then rather than blurting out questions or going through them in comment order, we add them to a table. We vote them up and down. We call that Dory. It's named for the fish who asked all the questions. But the most important part of the ritual is this thing in the middle we call Pulse. And Pulse is where we ask everybody to go on the record on your view on this discussion. I'm supportive, I'm not supportive, and here's why. And we do one specific thing is we have a little toggle at the top where we hide everybody else's pulses until everybody's done writing. That's how we remove groupthink. So if you ask a Coda employee on their first Friday about our golden ritual, they would almost certainly tell you about this one, not because they're meeting wonks. They'll tell you about this one because it's reflective of our culture. I'll hear them talk to their friends, and they'll say, oh yeah, I joined this company Coda, they have this value, great ideas can come from anywhere, and they really mean it. I was in this meeting, and my topic outvoted the CEOs. I don't know why outvoting the CEO is a big deal, but apparently it's a big deal. And they'll say, I got asked my opinion on this topic, and I actually got to write it down in a thoughtful way, and it wasn't performative, and it got incorporated into the discussion, and Coda really means it with this culture. So this is our golden ritual, but it's reflective of our culture. It also happens to be one of the most copied rituals in the Coda library, and so I've seen many other ways that people have adapted it. And I wrote a little piece about it about a year ago called 14 Ways to Dory Pulse, where I selected the variations that we've seen at other companies, each of which are tuned to what their company does. So I'll give you a few quick examples. So at Zoom, they have a decision-making process they call root cause reasoning. It comes right from Eric. Rather than IGEN Questions, he's very focused on making sure you get to the root cause of a question, not just to proximal problems. And they built it into their template. How do you get to the RCR, the root cause reasoning? At Coinbase, I had an interesting conversation with Surajit, who was CPO there at the time, and he saw all the stuff about Dory Pulse. He says, that's the opposite of our culture. We're not doing democracy here. We're not voting things up and down. We need to make it one clear decider and decide what we're going to do. He said, but I really like the idea that everybody has to write it down and we don't waste a bunch of time talking about it. And so they ended up taking a version of this and doing it a little bit differently, where they took their version of Pulse and they used Rapid there, and they just took every person's opinion, but they clearly indicated who's recommended, agree, perform, so on, and at the bottom is the decider, and that's the one that really matters. One back from YouTube. One of the problems we had at YouTube was we would sit down to do our planning. We called it Big Rock Planning, and inevitably, everybody would ask for resources for their project. It's a very natural thing to do. So we started doing a different ritual there we called $100 voting. A simple idea. Everybody, you need to pretend you're in charge of YouTube, and you allocate $100 across all the projects, And all of a sudden, we saw people take off their team hat and put on their company hat and change how we thought about our decision making. Another one, this is from David Singleton at Stripe. When I asked him about the rituals there, he said, well, the secret to why Stripe has 5 nines of reliability is a ritual they call spin the wheel. And it started with operational reviews, where they used to come in and they would look at all the outages for the week, and they would say, go through them in order of the most severe ones to the least severe ones. And instead of doing that, they said, everybody prepare, but we're going to spin a wheel and we're randomly going to pick whose outage we're going to talk about. And it was meant to send a message that if you really want to have 5 nines of reliability, you can't do it by just worrying about the big problems. You have to worry about the small ones too. And they ended up taking that same idea and applying it in all sorts of other rituals they do at Stripe, spin the wheel. All right, one last one is from Zapier. I love Zapier rituals. I think Wade and that team, I think of Zapier as the OG distributed team company. They did it before anybody thought remote teams were cool. And so they developed a whole set of rituals around that, one of which was something they call silent time. So they get into a meeting, and they have everybody write what they're working on, how they're thinking about something, and then they're supposed to go read what everybody else thinks. But what actually happens is everybody spends time writing and no time reading. And so they ended up adapting this ritual a little bit differently and saying, we're going to have a very specific phase where everybody writes, and then we're going to take everybody's topics, and they added a little button there so you could mark them red, and we're not starting until everybody has worked their way through their feed of everybody else's pulses and marked them red. All right, those are a bunch of different examples. If any of those resonate with you, that's great, but the real point is to take your culture and your decision process and make sure they match. What are you trying to get done? What are you trying to emphasize? And find the right ones that matches your culture. All right, ready for topic number 3. So you've got the right decision process. Now we've got to put it in the right forum. Lots of great rituals I've seen for this. A couple really famous ones. Pixar runs a ritual called Brain Trust. As a side note, Pixar's, if you read the book Creativity Inc., they'll talk about a lot of their rituals. The first 11 movies at Pixar were all nominated for Academy Awards, and they credit it mostly to their review process they call Brain Trust. Another one is from Netflix. They call their product reviews their gladiator meetings. They're held in a room. That's the picture of the room there. That literally looks like a forum around gladiators. So lots of different ways I've seen people run their decision forums. But one question I love to ask people is how many standing attendees are in your decision-making meeting? And as we start talking about, people will say, well, I have a decision-making meeting, and it's got, the 8 people on executive staff. So, well, actually, that one, it's grown. It now has 20 people. But actually, the real one where decisions get made, it has 60 standing attendees. I have a provocative plea for all of you. No standing attendees in your decision-making meeting. And if that seems impractical, hopefully I'll show you one way you can think about it. So first off, what's wrong with standing attendees in your decision-making meeting? Well, first you start off, you have all these people there. 3 people care about the topic that's being discussed. But you have to discuss it one topic at a time. Everyone else is either unnecessary or worse, disruptive. So we had a different idea for how to do this. We call this Catalyst. And the core idea is to go from a single-threaded meeting to a multi-threaded meeting. Here's how it works. At Coda, we block everyone's calendar from 1 to 2 p.m. every day of the week. You're not supposed to schedule anything over this time. We call that Catalyst. There's a doc. You go in and you schedule, this is the topic I need. You fill in the stage it's at, and you fill in who you need. And we've outlined the roles. It's kind of our version of Daisy or Rapid, but we use our terms for it. For example, you'll see that it's called Brain Trust. That's our version of how to pull forward what we loved about the Pixar culture. And then one very important thing happens. Every one of those things generates a unique calendar invite on the calendar with just that set of people with that topic as the title. And that may seem like a small thing, but it ended up being the hack that really makes this whole thing work. There's also another step where it goes and generates a set of Slack notifications. And these are meant to reinforce behaviors. So you'll get a notice saying you're invited for this review, this is your role, and here's a principle of what you should remember about what that role means here. You put all those things together, and you change the process completely. We used to have this single-threaded meeting. You get through topics one at a time, and all of a sudden we started parallelizing them. And I did the math on it. We used to get through something like 5 or 6 topics a week. We now get through, on average week, we get through 50 decisions. It also has some other interesting benefits, one of which is you can use this to get rid of the meeting altogether. Maybe we can do it async. So we added a new little piece of it where you get the Slack reminder saying you're invited to this catalyst, and you can go mark it to say it's default async. And what that means is everybody gets a notice saying, please fill out your Dorian Pulse before this time. And then assuming that all goes well, another message will go out saying, great news, all the feedback's been received, the driver of the meeting has decided we no longer need the meeting, and all of a sudden the meeting becomes a forcing function instead of an obligation. So those are a few different examples. You might take the Pixar Brain Trust model or the Netflix Gladiator model, the Coda Catalyst model, but the key thing is, does your decision forum accelerate or decelerate your decision-making process? All right, one last one. So you've got a great forum. Who do you invite? And more specifically, do you have to invite the founder to everything? So I'm going to tell you about a different ritual and then come back to this one. So this is a ritual from Dharmesh I mentioned earlier called Flashtags. And Dharmesh, as a founder, had this observation that whenever he gave feedback, people would often misinterpret it. They didn't know. Sometimes he meant it as a small thing. Sometimes he meant it as a big thing. And he decided to take all his feedback and add a little hashtag to it. And he published this guide of how to interpret his hashtags with a kind of funny analogy about dying on a hill. And he said, if I say hashtag FYI, it means I don't even see a hill. And if I say hashtag plea, it means dying on a hill is not on my bucket list, but if it were, this would be a really good candidate. And he started adding this to try to indicate severity of whatever his feedback was. So first off, we took this ritual, and we started adding it to a number of our other templates. You add feedback, you fill out. In addition to feedback, you add your flash tag of how serious you feel about it. But what we noticed was that it also often happened too late. And at that point, you come in and you say hashtag plea, and the team is already ready to ship, and it just seems like the feedback is the wrong part of the process. So our marketing team came up with this idea, and they called proactive flash tags. It's a pretty simple idea. We built a list of decisions we're trying to make, and we added 4 columns that kind of map to those 4 flash tags. It says, I don't need to be involved, just let me know the decision, I'd like to give input, or I may have strong opinions. And the idea is all the stakeholders are supposed to come, and you're supposed to pre-indicate where you're likely to be on this topic. And one of the nice parts about it is the implications are really obvious. So if I come in and say, I don't need to be involved, that means don't invite me to the catalyst, I don't need to hear anything about it. If I say I may have strong opinions, that means not only do you need to invite me to the catalyst, you need to invite me to the catalyst at the beginning of the process so that you can hear something about what my strong opinions would be and not be surprised later on. Now, one problem with this is you need to actually get your stakeholders to engage and fill this thing out. And so the way we handled that was we put it everywhere. So we took it, there's a central decision tracker in our company hub, but we then linked it into basically every other spot. The exec staff meeting has a list of the upcoming decisions where we pause and make sure people fill in the ones where they haven't indicated. Every team sync meeting has the same thing, even down to one-on-ones, where you'd say, here's the list of upcoming decisions and ones where you haven't indicated where you're likely to be on the stakeholder list. It totally changed how we thought about who to invite to each of our forums. So as you think about it, there's lots of different ways to do this, but it's one thing to have a great way to ask questions in the structured decision-making process and a great forum, but if you don't have the right people, none of it works. And so how do you find a scalable way to find the right decision stakeholders for every decision? All right, so these are the 4 steps. So as you think about your decision-making process, think about all 4 parts of these. How are you encouraging people to ask the right question? What is the actual process for making decisions? Is it reflective of your culture? Do you have a scalable way for your decision forum to accelerate progress instead of decelerating progress? And how do people figure out who the right decision stakeholders are for their problems? Everything I talked about here is published coda.io/@Shishir/Lenny 2024. That also has links to all the different rituals if you want to take any of those. But it also has a link to what I call the Rituals Brain Trust. And I'd love to invite you, if you're thinking about this topic, go join that and contribute a ritual or take ones from others and help all of the community improve their decision-making process. That's it for today. Thank you.